It was close to midnight when the sound of wood scraping against skin filled the hallway. My body jerked forward against the floor as Ryan's hand twisted into my hair, yanking so hard I felt strands rip from my scalp. Every inch of the floor burned against my skin as he dragged me through the narrow living room. My face slammed against the edge of the baseboard and hot blood poured instantly from my nose and lips. The metallic taste spread across my tongue, sharp and suffocating. I tried to lift my hands to grab hold of something solid, but my palms only scraped across the wood, leaving faint streaks of red behind me. "Stop, please," I cried, my voice breaking with a desperate rasp. "Mom, help me!" My scream carried down the hallway, echoing against the thin walls of the house. I was certain she heard me. The light above the kitchen spilled through the doorway, pale yellow and steady, and I knew she was there. For a brief moment, I believed she would step forward. Ryan's grip tightened. He leaned down, his breath thick with alcohol, words dripping with contempt. "You think you can talk back. You think anyone is going to save you." His boot drove into my ribs with such force that a cry erupted from my throat without permission. Pain surged through my chest like fire tearing me open. My vision blurred, but I clawed the ground anyway, desperate to pull myself toward the kitchen doorway. My body shook violently as I whispered again, "Mom, please, I need you." Then I saw her, my mother, Vera. She stood at the threshold in her pale nightgown, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her eyes were cold, her face set as though this was just another night in her house. My heart surged with a flicker of hope. Relief and anguish tangled together. She was there. She could stop him. She could pull me out. But she did not move. The silence was louder than Ryan's curses, louder than my own sobs, louder than the sharp crack when his fist collided with the side of my face. My head snapped against the wood stars exploding behind my eyes. I blinked through blood dripping into my lashes. She was still there, just watching. The door moved slowly closing, inch by inch. The wooden frame swallowed the light, leaving me in shadow. Before it shut completely, her lips parted. Her voice was calm, smooth, chilling. "Handle it yourself." Then the latch clicked, final and cruel. I gasped, trying to push myself up, but my arms trembled and collapsed beneath me. Ryan dragged me again, my cheek scraping across the floor. My skin tore open and fresh blood smeared beneath me like a trail leading nowhere. A whimper escaped my throat. For one insane second, I thought maybe she would come back. Maybe she would not leave me to die in the dark. The door opened again. My heart pounded wildly. Vera stepped inside. She knelt down just enough so her perfume mixed with the smell of blood. Her hand pressed against my cheek, cold, not comforting. Her fingers forced my eyes open. Her lips lowered close to my ear. In a whisper softer than the hum of the refrigerator, she said, "If only you behaved better, this would not happen." Her touch slipped away. She rose, smoothed the fabric of her nightgown, and left. The door closed again, and this time it stayed shut. The house was silent, except for the ragged sound of my breathing and Ryan's heavy footsteps as he paced above me, preparing for another blow. My body ached with every heartbeat, but it was not just the pain of broken skin and ribs. It was the pain of realization. I understood in that moment that my mother was never going to save me. She had never saved me. She never intended to. I was not always lying in blood on the floor, begging for help. There was a time when I thought being invisible was safer than being seen, a time when I believed my silence would protect me. Growing up in our house, Ryan was the chosen one, the golden boy who could do no wrong. I was the background figure, the one told to stay quiet, the one whose needs were always too much. Mom called it balance, but it was never balance. It was worship for him and erasure for me. I remember being 7 years old and waiting for my birthday cake. I had made a wish list weeks in advance, nothing extravagant, just a few books and a small cake with pink frosting. That afternoon, Vera came home with a chocolate cake, and for 1 second, my heart leapt. She set it down on the counter, then Ryan burst through the door carrying his baseball glove. Vera laughed, pulled him into a hug, and scribbled, "Congratulations, Ryan," across the frosting and red icing. She told everyone we were celebrating his winning game. My birthday was never mentioned. I stood in the corner as they cut the cake, holding my hands together so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The candles were never lit for me. From that day, I learned my place. At 12, I thought maybe school would be my escape. I studied hard, stayed up late, writing essays, memorized every formula. When the letter arrived announcing I had been awarded a scholarship for an academic program, I thought my life would finally change. The envelope had my name printed clearly, bold, and proud. I ran to show Vera, but she snatched it from my hand. Days turned into weeks, and the program coordinator told me they never received my response. Confused, I searched the house and found the letter hidden in a drawer under Vera's sewing kit. The acceptance deadline had passed. When I confronted her, her voice was flat. "You couldn't have handled the pressure anyway. I saved you from disappointment." That was her favorite phrase, saving me from things I had never asked her to save me from. At 14, I was desperate for some recognition, some proof that I mattered. One evening after dinner, Ryan knocked over a glass of milk and blamed me. Vera did not hesitate. Her hand shot out and slapped me across the cheek, her face twisted with irritation. "Stop being dramatic," she hissed. I swallowed the sting not from the slap, but from the certainty that my truth had no weight in her house. At 16, I thought maybe my teachers would see me. I stayed after class one afternoon to tell Ms. Thompson, my English teacher, that things at home were not right. She nodded gently, promised she would check in. The next day, Vera stormed into school, tears streaming down her face, telling administrators that I had severe emotional problems. She claimed I had been unstable for years, that I made up stories for attention. I sat in the office while they believed her, my voice drowned beneath her practiced sobs. From then on, every time I tried to speak up, someone whispered behind my back, "She's unstable." That label stuck like glue, and Vera wielded it like a weapon. By 17, I had stopped asking for birthday cakes for recognition for hugs. Ryan grew taller, stronger, more violent. He shoved me down the stairs once after I refused to clean his room. I sprained my wrist in the fall. Vera scolded me for being clumsy. At family gatherings, Ryan would make jokes about me, shove me in front of relatives, and they all laughed because Vera laughed. When I cried later in my room, she opened the door only to say, "Do not make a scene." Good daughters know their place. The truth was, my place had always been to absorb the blows, carry the silence, and stay small. I tried to hide pieces of myself in journals, secret notes written under the covers at night. I wrote about wanting to escape, about imagining a different mother, one who would rush in when I was in pain, one who would hold me instead of telling me I was dramatic. I never dared show anyone those words. When Ryan smashed one of my notebooks in half, Vera laughed. "You waste time with fantasies," she said. "Be useful." The years blurred into a pattern of silence and punishment. Any time I tried to speak, I was told I was ungrateful. Any time I succeeded, my victory was stolen. My childhood was not measured in milestones, but in lessons about erasure. I became a ghost in my own house. I can still see myself at 18 standing in front of the mirror in my prom dress. It was not new, just a second-hand one from a thrift store, but I had saved weeks of part-time wages to buy it. Ryan walked into the room, sneered, and said I looked pathetic. Vera glanced at me once and said, "Do not embarrass us tonight." At prom, I smiled through the photos, but inside I knew no matter how hard I tried, nothing would ever be enough for her. Those memories stacked one after another until the night of the attack, when Ryan's hand twisted in my hair and Vera closed the door. Lying in blood, I realized this violence was not sudden. It was the conclusion of years of silence, years of stolen birthdays, stolen opportunities, and a mother who decided long ago that her son was worth more than her daughter. And in that moment, I felt not just the ache of broken skin, but the heavier wound of being invisible for 2 decades. As I grew older, the walls of that house became smaller, suffocating me with every year. By the time I turned 19, Ryan had become more than just the golden boy he had turned into Vera's weapon. His voice carried the authority of the household. When he shouted, everyone listened. When I resisted even a little, he lashed out with fists or cruel words, and Vera always justified it. She called it discipline, she called it tough love, but it was violence disguised as order. The first time he pushed me down the stairs, I was 16. My body slammed against the wooden steps, and I landed at the bottom, gasping for air with my wrist bent unnaturally. I looked up, expecting my mother to rush toward me. Instead, she stood halfway down the staircase, Ryan behind her, and she said, "Emma, you need to watch where you are going. Stop making everything into drama." That phrase became her shield against every accusation I ever tried to voice. Stop being dramatic. Stop making a scene. Stop exaggerating. It was her way of erasing me over and over until I questioned my own reality. By 18, Ryan had grown stronger, his temper unchecked. At family dinners, he would shove me out of the way or twist my arm while relatives watched. When I cried out, they laughed along with him because Vera laughed first. In their eyes, it was all just sibling roughhousing. Only I knew the bruises blooming under my sleeves. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen, slammed me against the fridge, and hissed that I was nothing. When I told Vera later, her eyes hardened. "Do not provoke your brother. If you were easier to live with, he would not lose his temper." That was how she twisted responsibility, convincing me the abuse was my fault. The control was not just physical, it was everywhere. Vera kept every important document locked in her desk drawer. Birth certificate, bank statements, even my ID when she wanted to punish me. She checked my phone bills, my emails sometimes, even opening my letters before I saw them. Once, when I tried to apply for a summer job, she intercepted the call, told the employer I was sick and unstable. I never got a second chance. She controlled money tightly. Any allowance she gave me had strings attached. If I did not follow her instructions, she cut it off, leaving me scrambling. She said it was for my own good, that I was not ready to handle independence. I believed her longer than I should have. At school, I thought maybe someone would notice. One afternoon, I confided in my guidance counselor. I showed her a faint bruise on my arm, told her Ryan had grabbed me too hard. She looked concerned and called Vera. The next day, my mother stormed into school with crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks. She told the staff that I had emotional instability, that I lied to get attention, that I twisted harmless events into horror stories. She handed them papers, false medical notes she had fabricated, claiming I had a history of anxiety and delusion. The counselor looked at me differently after that. I saw the doubt settle in her eyes. Vera had planted poison in every corner of my life. After that day, whenever I tried to report anything, teachers brushed me off gently, suggesting therapy, suggesting calmness. They never believed me. At 17, I stood in front of my classmates during a group project, my voice shaking because I knew Vera had already emailed the teacher warning them I was unstable. It was as if every step I took forward, she reached out from the shadows and shoved me 2 steps back. Ryan thrived under this system. He strutted through the house like a king, knowing his violence would never have consequences. He hit me across the face once when I refused to give him my homework. I felt my lips split open, and when Vera saw the blood, she sighed and handed me a tissue. "Clean up, do not exaggerate." Ryan grinned beside her. That night, I cried into my pillow, muffling my sobs so no one could hear. Emotional undulation tore through me. Some mornings, I still clung to hope that Vera might wake up and remember I was her daughter. Other nights, I drowned in certainty that she never loved me at all. At a family barbecue, Ryan shoved me so hard that I stumbled into the grill. Heat seared against my arm, blistering the skin instantly. I screamed, the smell of burnt flesh filling the air. Relatives gasped, but before anyone could rush forward, Vera laughed and said, "She is always clumsy." They accepted her explanation without question. I spent the night bandaging my arm alone. That was the rhythm of my life. Hurt, dismissal, silence. I journaled, secretly writing everything I could not say aloud. I listed the dates of every bruise, every broken promise. But even in those pages, I questioned myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe Vera was right. Maybe Ryan was just being a brother. That doubt was the cruelest wound of all because it kept me chained to them, believing I was the problem. By 19, the violence had escalated so much that I was constantly on edge. Every sound in the hallway made me flinch. I kept a small bag packed under my bed in case I found the courage to run. But Vera always found a way to remind me I had nowhere to go. "You would not survive without me," she said often. "No one believes you anyway." And the tragic part was that she was right. Every attempt I made to reach out ended with someone shaking their head, convinced by Vera's lies. I was isolated, controlled, erased. Until the night Ryan dragged me across the floor and Vera closed the door, all of that history built like kindling, waiting for a spark. The night the police came should have been the night everything changed, but instead it became another lesson in how deeply Vera's lies were rooted. It was late evening and Ryan was in one of his rages. He had been drinking his words slurred with anger, his hands fast and heavy. He slammed me into the wall so hard that picture frames crashed to the floor, glass scattering across the hallway. My scream tore through the air, and this time the neighbor heard. Mr. Brown, an older man who lived next door, knocked on the wall and shouted to ask if everything was all right. When my cries only grew louder, he called 911. The sound of the sirens in the distance filled me with a surge of desperate hope. Maybe finally someone would see. Maybe finally I would be believed. When the officers arrived, two tall figures in dark uniforms, Ryan froze for a second, and Vera instantly stepped into her role. She ran to the door before they even knocked, clutching her robe around her like a shield, tears already streaming down her face. "Thank God you are here," she sobbed. "My daughter, she is unstable again. She attacked Ryan. We are terrified for our safety." Her voice was perfectly pitched between desperation and sorrow, the kind of performance only someone practiced could deliver. I stood behind her, blood on my lip, arms trembling, trying to speak. "That is not true. He hurt me. Please, look at me." The officers glanced at me, and I saw hesitation flicker for just a second. But then Vera held out a folder she had prepared long ago. She told them I had a documented history of emotional instability, that I fabricated injuries, that I lashed out for attention. The papers were filled with false doctor notes, forged details, and because they looked official, the officers believed her. One of them asked Ryan if he had been hurt. Ryan rolled up his sleeve, where faint scratches self-inflicted in the struggle showed against his skin. "She loses control," he said calmly, his voice rehearsed. "We never know what she might do." I shouted, begged them to listen, showed them my bruises, my bleeding lip, the swelling forming on my cheek. But the officers exchanged a look that told me they had already decided who to believe. One of them pulled me aside, his tone calm but firm. "Emma, your mother is very worried about you. Maybe you need to take some time, get some help." Help. That word sliced deeper than Ryan's fists. Help had become another cage, another dismissal. Vera cried louder behind us, pressing her face into Ryan's shoulder like a grieving mother clinging to her son. "Please do not take her away," she begged. "She needs care, not punishment." They believed her. They gave me a warning, told me to calm down, told me not to cause more trouble. Then they left. The red and blue lights faded from the window, leaving me standing in the middle of shattered glass, my chest heaving with disbelief. Ryan smirked at me, victorious, while Vera closed the folder of forged records with slow, deliberate satisfaction. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You see, Emma, no one is going to believe you. You are the problem. You always will be." My knees gave out and I collapsed onto the shards, tears mixing with the blood on my skin. The silence after the sirens faded was heavier than any blow Ryan had given me. I had clung to the hope that the system would save me, that the truth would matter. But the truth did not stand a chance against her lies. Emotional undulation pulled me under. For a moment, I wanted to give up entirely, to accept that escape was impossible. The walls felt like they were closing in, every door locked by Vera's manipulation, every window painted shut with her lies. But beneath the despair, a flicker of anger began to burn. If the world would not believe me then, I would need to create proof no one could deny. That night, as I lay in bed with my ribs aching and my skin torn, I whispered to myself, "They will not erase me again." The police might have walked away, but I would not. I would learn, I would fight, and I would find a way to make the truth louder than her tears. The breaking point did not arrive with a single scream or strike. It arrived in silence in the heavy thud of a door closing while my body bled on the floor. I lay there unable to move, tasting iron in my mouth, feeling the sticky warmth spreading across my cheek where skin had split open. Ryan's footsteps faded into another room, the air humming with the echo of violence. For a few seconds, I thought maybe Vera would return. Maybe she would remember I was her child and not a problem to be erased. But the door stayed closed, the house stayed quiet, and I understood that the silence was my answer. My mind replayed every memory stacked like stones pressing down on my chest. The birthdays where my name was erased, the scholarship letter hidden in a drawer, the lies whispered into the ears of teachers and neighbors, the forged papers handed to police. Every moment was a rehearsal for this night. My ribs ached with each breath, but worse was the weight of recognition that all along I had been waiting for someone who never intended to save me. I remembered being small, holding her hand at the grocery store, believing she would protect me from everything. I remembered watching her brush Ryan's hair, the tenderness in her touch that I never received. I remembered thinking maybe one day she would look at me with pride. None of those hopes mattered now. I felt the truth slide into me like a knife. If I stayed silent, if I kept waiting, I would vanish completely. My body would not survive another night like this. My spirit would not survive another betrayal. In that moment, pain shifted into clarity. I was not just a victim. I was the only witness who could expose what they had done. If I gave up now, the lies would bury me and she would win again. The thought of Vera's calm face as she closed that door hardened something inside me. I could almost hear her whisper repeating in my ear, "Handle it yourself." So I would. Not the way she intended, not by suffering in silence, but by turning every wound into proof, every scar into testimony. My heart pounded through the fog of pain, and I felt a strange steadiness rising. This was not about asking for her love anymore. It was about survival, and it was about truth. The ache in my bones told me I was still alive, and as long as I was alive, I could fight back. I closed my eyes and whispered into the empty room, a vow meant only for me. If I walk away from this night, I will never let them erase me again. It was not loud, it did not need to be. The words were a seed planted deep in the wreckage of my body, a seed that would grow into something stronger than their control. For the first time in years, the despair did not consume me completely. It burned into something else, something sharper. I realized I did not need Vera's permission to exist. I did not need Ryan's silence to breathe. I needed my own resolve, and it was finally awake. The morning after the attack, my body ached with every breath, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I moved slowly through the house, careful not to let Ryan or Vera see the determination settling inside me. I knew if I confronted them directly, I would lose again, but if I collected proof, they could not erase me so easily. I hid my phone in my pocket and began recording whenever Ryan shouted, whenever Vera dismissed my pain. At first, the clips were short fragments of chaos, his voice rising, her tone slicing, but slowly the recordings began to form a pattern. A chain of abuse no one could deny. I learned to angle the phone just right so that a bruise or a swollen lip was caught in the frame. At night, when the house was quiet, I photographed the marks across my body, time-stamped evidence that belonged only to me. Every image felt like a small rebellion, a way of saying, "I exist, this happened." I kept the files hidden in a secure folder with a password no one else knew. The risk was enormous. If Ryan found the phone, he would destroy it if Vera discovered my secret. She would call me delusional again and perhaps lock me away. But each day I added another piece to the puzzle, and with every piece I felt stronger. The shift in me grew when I reached out to someone from my past. Sophia had been my closest friend in middle school until Vera forbade me from seeing her, claiming she was a bad influence. Years had passed without contact, but one night, with my ribs still throbbing, I searched her name online. I found her through a social page, and with trembling hands, I sent a message. I expected silence, but she answered within an hour. She said she remembered everything, the way Vera pulled me away from her without explanation, the way I vanished from her life. When I told her I needed help, she did not hesitate. We met secretly at a cafe far from the neighborhood. The moment I saw her face across the table, I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time in years, someone looked at me without suspicion, without judgment. I showed her some of the photographs, and she took my hand, whispering, "Emma, you are not crazy. You were never crazy. They did this to you." Her words cracked something inside me, and for the first time, tears felt like release instead of weakness. Sophia introduced me to Mark, a young lawyer she knew from her college circle. At first, I was hesitant. What if he dismissed me like everyone else? But Mark listened carefully, asking questions, taking notes. He told me that with enough evidence, I could build a case not just of abuse, but of coercive control. His words terrified me and thrilled me at the same time. Could I really hold them accountable? Could I really step out of the shadows? From that moment, my secret mission deepened. I copied files onto an external drive hidden inside a hollowed-out book. I printed emails where Vera had lied to my teachers, labeling me unstable. I gathered medical records from the times I had visited clinics, even when Vera insisted the injuries were accidents. Piece by piece, I was constructing a story they could not erase. Emotional undulation defined every day. Some mornings I woke filled with determination, clutching the drive to my chest like a lifeline. Other nights I shook with fear, certain they would discover my secret and crush me before I had the chance to escape. Once Ryan pounded on my door in the middle of the night, screaming that I had stolen his wallet. I hid the drive under my mattress, heart hammering, certain he would find it. But he stormed out before searching. I held my breath for a long time after trembling, knowing how close I had come to losing everything. Yet every risk made me more certain I was on the right path. One evening, as Vera lectured me about being ungrateful, I slipped my phone onto the table, recording her words. She leaned in close and hissed, "You will never survive without me. Do you understand that, Emma, no one wants you, no one believes you?" I saved the file and labeled it proof. It was the clearest admission yet of her manipulation. When I played it back later, I felt my heart racing with equal parts terror and relief. Terror that she might discover I had trapped her words, relief that I finally had undeniable evidence. Sophia checked on me regularly, reminding me that I was not alone anymore. Mark began outlining how the law worked, what kind of documents would strengthen my case. For the first time, I had allies. I was no longer a ghost suffering in silence. I was a survivor building a weapon out of truth. The fear never vanished, but it coexisted with a new kind of courage. Every bruise, every insult, every forged document I uncovered became part of the arsenal. Vera had taught me for years that silence was survival. Now I was learning the opposite. Silence had been my cage, but truth would be my escape. And though my body still carried the bruises, my mind was no longer bowed. I whispered to myself each night before sleep, I will not disappear. I will not be erased. The invitation came in the form of a neatly written note left on my nightstand, though I never knew how Vera managed to slip into my room without me noticing. The note said simply, "Dinner tomorrow at 7, we need to talk." For hours I debated whether to go or not, but something inside me whispered that this could be my chance. Sophia and Mark both advised caution, but I knew I needed to face them at least once more, and I needed to do it on my terms. The next evening, I walked into the dining room where the table was set with candles and Vera's best dishes. She smiled as if we were a normal family preparing for a reunion. Ryan sat slouched in his chair, his eyes following me like a predator waiting to pounce. Vera gestured to the seat across from her and said, "We have had our differences, but I want us to move forward." Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with false warmth. I kept my phone hidden in my jacket pocket, recording every word. For a few moments, the conversation was light, almost surreal. She asked about my classes, pretending to be interested while Ryan chewed loudly, glaring at me. Then Vera set a folder in the center of the table, sliding it across the polished wood. "We found a new house," she said, clasping her hands together. "A dream home. All we need is your signature to help secure the mortgage. Just as a formality." My heart thudded, but I kept my expression steady. I opened the folder, glancing at the papers filled with legal terms and highlighted signature lines. I said calmly, "I would like to review this with someone first, just to understand." Her smile did not falter, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. Ryan slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. "So you do not trust your own family?" he spat. I looked at him, then at Vera, waiting for her to defend me. But she only sipped her wine as if his anger were natural. Ryan's voice grew louder. "You have been nothing but a problem since you were born. If you cared about Mom at all, you would sign it right now." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist hard enough to make me wince. My phone was still recording in my pocket. I said firmly, "Let go." He shoved me back in my chair, his face twisted with rage. For a moment, I thought he would strike me right there, but Vera's voice cut through. "Enough, Ryan." Then she turned her eyes on me, cold and sharp. "You were never part of this family, Emma." Her words fell like a blade, slicing through any illusion I had left. I stared at her, memorizing every syllable. The recording captured it perfectly. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. I said quietly, "Thank you for reminding me." Ryan lunged forward, but Vera held up her hand. "Let her go," she said. Her calmness was chilling, as if she believed she had already won. I walked out of that house with my heart pounding, but also with a strange sense of triumph. They thought they had cornered me again, but instead they had given me the final piece I needed. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp against my skin. I clutched my jacket close around me, protecting the phone hidden inside. The recording was safe. For years, they had told me I was dramatic, unstable, unworthy. Now I had their own voices betraying them. Emotional undulation rippled through me as I walked away. Part of me trembled with fear, certain they would come after me again. Another part of me burned with resolve, knowing the truth was finally louder than their lies. When I reached Sophia's apartment, I collapsed into a chair and played the recording for her and Mark. As Vera's voice filled the room, both of them stared in silence. When it ended, Mark looked at me and said, "This is enough to begin." My body shook, but not from fear this time. It was from the weight of knowing that for the first time in my life I was no longer powerless. The courthouse smelled of old paper and disinfectant, and as I walked through the double doors clutching the binder Mark had helped me prepare, I felt every bruise, every scar, every stolen year pressing against my skin like armor. Sophia walked beside me, her hand brushing my shoulder to steady me, while Mark carried his own stack of files, his tie slightly crooked, his face determined. The hallway buzzed with people waiting for their hearings, custody battles, divorces, small claims. But for me, this was not paperwork. This was survival. When the clerk called my name, my knees trembled, but I stood tall, Emma Harrison plaintiff. Saying my real name aloud felt like tearing off a mask. Inside the courtroom, Vera sat at the defense table dressed in pale pink, her posture graceful, her expression calm, as if she were attending a church service not facing the truth. Ryan sat beside her, his jaw clenched, his eyes full of contempt. The judge looked tired but attentive, flipping through the documents as Mark began presenting our case. First came the medical reports from the night I was dragged across the floor. Ribs bruised, face bleeding. The photographs projected onto the screen made me want to look away, but I forced myself to watch. The truth was ugly, but it was mine. Then Mr. Brown testified, his voice shaking as he described the night he called 911. How he heard my screams, how he saw me bleeding through the open doorway. The officers' reports followed their dismissive language exposed against the reality of the injuries. Mark pointed out the inconsistencies, how Vera's fabricated medical notes did not match any real physician's record. Then came the recording. My heart hammered as my own voice filled the room, begging Ryan to let go, begging Vera to help. The courtroom fell silent as her voice rang out clear and cold. "You were never part of this family." I glanced at her across the room. For the first time, her composure faltered. A flicker of something crossed her face, maybe fear, maybe rage. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Vera's attorney tried to object, claiming it was taken out of context, but Mark countered firmly that the context was the very pattern of coercion and abuse we had outlined. He produced more evidence emails Vera had sent to my teachers labeling me unstable audio of her saying no one would believe me, photographs of my bruises, each time stamped and authenticated. Emotional undulation carried me high and low as I listened. There were moments when I wanted to collapse under the weight of remembering moments when I wanted to scream at her across the room, but above all, there was a steady flame inside me whispering, "Hold steady." When it was Vera's turn to speak, she put on her most sorrowful face and told the judge that she had only ever tried to protect me, that I was troubled, unstable, prone to exaggeration. Her words were syrupy, but they could not erase the recordings or the photographs. Ryan claimed I had attacked him more than once, showing faint scratches on his arms, but the doctor testified they were inconsistent with his story. Slowly, piece by piece, their story crumbled. I took the stand and told everything in a calm, steady voice. I described the birthdays, erased the scholarship, hidden the times Ryan struck me while Vera stood by. I did not cry, though my throat burned. I spoke as if reading from a book of evidence because that was what my life had become, a dossier of truths that could no longer be silenced. When I finished, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. The judge reviewed the files for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Finally, she spoke. "This court finds sufficient evidence of sustained domestic abuse and coercive control. Ryan Maddox is hereby sentenced under charges of assault and battery. Vera Maddox is found liable for emotional damages, obstruction of educational opportunity, and deliberate psychological harm." My chest flooded with a mixture of relief and disbelief. It was over, at least in the legal sense. Ryan slammed his fist against the table, shouting curses as officers moved to escort him out. Vera sat frozen, her hands trembling as the pink fabric of her blouse seemed to lose all its shine. The judge's voice echoed in my head as she concluded, "This court recognizes a pattern of long-term abuse and manipulation substantiated by evidence." For the first time in years, I felt seen. The gavel struck once, and the sound vibrated through me like a final break in the chains. As we walked out of the courtroom, Sophia hugged me so tightly my ribs ached, but I welcomed the pain. Mark placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did it, Emma." Outside, the sun was brighter than I remembered the air lighter, as if the world itself had shifted. Emotional undulation hit me again, tears rising not from despair, but from the release of years of silence. The system that once turned its back had finally listened, and the truth that Vera tried to bury had bloomed in public for everyone to see. In the weeks following the trial, the house that had been my prison seemed to shrink into whispers of shame. Ryan was sentenced and taken away, his voice no longer echoing through the halls. For the first time in years, I slept without the fear of his footsteps outside my door. The silence was strange at first, almost unbearable, but slowly it became comforting, a reminder that he could not touch me anymore. Vera's fall was different, but no less absolute. Word spread quickly through the community about the court's decision. The woman who once commanded sympathy with tears and polished lies now carried the mark of public disgrace. The dental office where she worked quietly let her go citing restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. Neighbors who once nodded politely now avoided her gaze in the grocery store. Church friends who praised her devotion no longer invited her to gatherings. The social mask she had worn for decades cracked, and beneath it she was just another woman exposed for cruelty. For me, the aftermath was not instant victory, but slow steps toward freedom. The scholarship board reviewed my case, and though years had passed, they acknowledged the injustice. They could not return lost time, but they sent me a letter of reinstatement, symbolic and powerful. When I held the paper in my hands, my name printed clearly with words of recognition, I felt tears sting my eyes. It was not about the money anymore, it was about validation that I had been worthy all along. Vera's attempts to reach me did not stop. A few weeks after the verdict, I received a letter without a return address. It was short and sharp. "You think this is over. It isn't." I folded it and placed it in the back of my binder with the other evidence. It no longer scared me. It only reminded me that her power had shifted from control to bitterness. People in town began to approach me quietly, offering words of support. Mr. Brown shook my hand firmly, saying he wished he had done more sooner. A former teacher emailed me admitting she had believed Vera's lies, but now realized she had been manipulated. Each message was a stitch mending the torn fabric of my self-worth. Emotional undulation continued. There were mornings I woke smiling with the sunlight through my window, and nights when nightmares dragged me back into the hallway with Ryan's hand in my hair. Healing was not linear, but at least it had begun. When I walked through town now, I was no longer invisible. I was the girl who had stood up to her family and won. And though the title was heavy, it was also liberating. For years I had been erased, but now my name was written into records, testimonies, and verdicts that could not be undone. The aftermath was not just about their downfall, it was about reclaiming my own life piece by piece, breath by breath, until freedom felt natural on my skin. Freedom did not arrive with fireworks or a grand celebration. It arrived in small moments of quiet when the air no longer carried fear and my body no longer flinched at every sound. I moved into a small apartment with secondhand furniture and uneven floors, but it felt like a palace because it was mine. Each creak of the wooden boards reminded me that no one else controlled the locks. No one else could decide when I was allowed to breathe. I began volunteering at a local community center where women gathered to share stories of survival. At first, I only listened, sitting in the circle of folding chairs with my hands clasped tight, but gradually words spilled out of me. I told them about Vera's lies, about Ryan's violence, about the nights I begged for help and was told to handle it myself. Faces around the circle nodded, not with pity, but with recognition. Some of the women were older, some younger, but the ache in their eyes was the same. One evening, a girl no older than 16 hovered at the doorway, unsure whether to come in. I recognized the posture, the folded arms, the eyes darting like a trapped bird. When the meeting ended, I approached her gently and asked if she was all right. She whispered almost too quietly to hear I still live with her. I did not need to ask who her was. Without thinking, I reached for the necklace I wore every day, a simple silver chain that once had been twisted into Vera's performance of love, but which I had reclaimed as my own. I placed it in the girl's hand and said, "Keep it until you are ready." Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She only nodded, holding the chain like a promise. That night, I went home and sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the stack of journals and evidence that had once been my lifeline. They were still important, but they no longer defined me. I brewed coffee and opened my notebook, not to record pain this time, but to write a message to myself. Do not wait for an apology. Justice begins the moment you stop being silent. The words glowed on the page like a lantern in the dark. Emotional undulations still shaped my days. There were moments of grief when I thought of the years stolen, and moments of triumph when I realized I had survived. But the balance had shifted. Despair no longer outweighed hope. I understood that closure was not about forgetting or pretending it had never happened. Closure was about choosing to live without chains. On my 20th birthday, I lit a candle on a small homemade cake. I whispered a wish not for someone else to love me, but for the strength to keep loving myself. The flame flickered steady in the quiet room, and I felt the kind of peace that had always been denied to me. Somewhere across town, Vera probably sat in her sagging armchair with curtains drawn, her world shrinking with each passing day. I did not need her apology anymore. I had my truth, I had my voice, and I had the proof that she could never erase me again.